Somewhere in the doldrums of the Atlantic, around 1721, a rowboat sat completely still on water that looked like glass. No wind, no current, no oars. Inside it, one man. He had been a pirate 3 days earlier, a gunner who had served on a sloop with 30 other men, eaten hot food, heard human voices, laughed at someone's joke. Now he had a knife, a half-empty bottle of water, and a pistol with a single shot. And every single pirate who watched his old crewmates row away knew exactly why that pistol was there. It wasn't for the sharks circling the boat. It was for him, whenever the silence finally became unbearable. Here's the part most people get wrong. They think a pirate's worst nightmare was the noose, that sudden drop, the crack, and it's over. They think it was keel hauling, getting dragged under a ship's hull until barnacles strip the skin off your back. Both of those were horrific. Both of those could kill you in minutes. But ask any pirate captain in 1720 what punishment made grown men weep and beg on their knees. And they wouldn't say the rope. They wouldn't say the lash. They'd point out at the empty ocean and say one word: that. Because pirates didn't fear death. Men who sailed under a black flag had already made peace with dying young, dying violently, dying in a hail of grape shot, with a cutlass in their hand. What they feared was a death with no end point, a death that stretched out for days, while your own mind turned against you. Today, we're going deep into the actual punishments of the Golden Age of Piracy. And at the center of it, the one sentence so psychologically brutal that even hardened killers would have traded it for a quick bullet to the skull. Before we get to the one that broke men's minds, you need to understand the baseline of pirate discipline. Because pirate ships weren't lawless chaos. They were some of the most rigidly governed vessels on the ocean, run on a signed contract called the Articles of Agreement. Every man aboard signed it, and every man knew the punishments listed in it by heart, because his life depended on it. The most common punishment for small infractions was the cat o' nine tails. 9 knotted cords attached to a wooden handle swung across a man's back by the bosun, while the rest of the crew watched. It wasn't just painful, it was designed to be. Each knot tore the skin separately, so a dozen lashes left a man's back looking like he'd been mauled by an animal. Scarring was permanent. Men carried those marks for the rest of their lives, as a visible record of their worst mistakes. Then there was flogging, round the fleet, reserved for serious crimes when a pirate squadron operated multiple ships together. The condemned man was rowed from vessel to vessel, receiving a fresh round of lashes at each one, while the crew of every ship watched in silence. By the time the boat reached the last ship, the man's back was often shredded down to muscle, and some didn't survive the trip. And then, keel hauling. This is the one most people have heard of, but few understand correctly. A rope was run under the keel of the ship, from one side to the other. The condemned man was tied to it and dragged, fully submerged, along the entire underside of the hull. The hull of a ship that had been at sea for months wasn't smooth. It was caked in barnacles, sharp as broken glass, and rough coral-like growth that had been hardening in salt water for weeks. As the man was pulled under and across, that surface didn't just scrape him, it shredded him, layer by layer, while he held what was left of his breath in freezing water, with salt pouring into open wounds. Most men who survived keel hauling were never the same. Many didn't survive it at all, drowning halfway through the pull or dying from blood loss and shock within hours of being hauled back on deck. It was savage, it was fast, and pirates feared it. But here's the detail that changes everything. Keel hauling was over in minutes. The punishment we're building toward could last for 2 weeks. You've seen marooning in every pirate movie ever made. A man left standing on a sun-drenched tropical beach, palm trees swaying, a pistol tucked in his belt, looking mildly inconvenienced rather than doomed. That image is almost entirely fiction, built by Hollywood to make piracy look adventurous instead of monstrous. Real marooning was a slow execution disguised as mercy. Here's how it actually worked under the Articles of Agreement, followed by crews like Bartholomew Roberts' fleet, which formalized the punishment in writing. A man found guilty of theft from the crew, desertion, or cowardice in battle wasn't simply abandoned on the nearest island. He was rowed out specifically to find the smallest, most isolated, least hospitable scrap of land the crew could locate, frequently a sandbar or rock barely above the waterline, with no fresh water source and no shelter from the sun. He was given almost nothing: a single bottle of fresh water, a small charge of gunpowder, and one loaded pistol with exactly one shot. That pistol is the detail that tells you everything about how pirates understood psychology. It wasn't given so the man could hunt food, because there usually wasn't any food to hunt on a strip of sand that small. It was given so the man had a choice once thirst, sunburn, and isolation became worse than dying. Pirates weren't being merciful by including a weapon. They were acknowledging with brutal honesty exactly how this was going to end, and letting the man decide how much suffering he wanted to endure before reaching that ending himself. Picture the actual experience. The longboat pulls away. The voices of men you've eaten with, fought beside, and laughed with for months get quieter and quieter until there's nothing but wind and waves. No walls. No hammock swinging with the ship's motion. No rum ration handed out at sunset. Just heat that doesn't let up, skin that blisters within a day, and water that runs out faster than you think it will. Some marooned men lasted over a week before the elements finished them. Some used the pistol on day 2, and still, even this, the crushing isolation, the blistering sun, the slow dehydration, wasn't the punishment pirates feared most. Because marooning, however cruel, at least gave a man solid ground under his feet. What came next took that away too. Quick pause. Before we get into the punishment, that broke men faster than any whip ever could. Stories like this are the kind of history you actually want more of. The kind that doesn't get sanitized for a Disney ride. Subscribe and turn on notifications so the next deep dive lands in your feed automatically. Now, back into the dark. This is the one. Pirate crews called it different things depending on the ship and the captain. The captain But the method was consistent enough across the Golden Age that we can reconstruct exactly what it looked like. Lucky, and exactly why it broke men who had already survived musket fire, amputation, and the lash without flinching, instead of leaving a condemned man on an island, where at least the ground stayed still, and a man could walk, dig, search, or simply collapse on solid earth. The worst version of this sentence placed him in a small open boat with no oars, and abandoned him in the doldrums. For anyone who hasn't heard the term, the doldrums are a real band of ocean near the equator, where the trade winds from the north and south cancel each other out almost completely. Ships could sit there for weeks with sails hanging dead and useless, because there was often no wind at all to fill them. Picture what that boat actually looked like from the inside. Flat, calm water in every direction, stretching to a horizon you can barely distinguish from the sky, because there's no wave action to break the surface into anything but a single sheet of glare. No shoreline, no landmark, no fixed point for your eyes or your mind to hold on to. Sailors who survived encounters with the doldrums. The ocean surface becoming a mirror, so still it reflected clouds with almost no distortion, which sounds peaceful until you realize you're trapped inside that mirror with nothing to do but watch it. There were three things working together to dismantle a man's mind in that boat, and pirates who had seen it happen to others understood all three. The first was total sensory deprivation. No wind meant no sound of waves slapping the hull. No crew meant no voices, no footsteps, no creak of rigging, none of the constant background noise that every sailor's brain had been trained to filter out for years. That noise wasn't just background. It was proof other people existed. Take it away completely, for days at a time, and the human brain starts manufacturing input on its own. Men reported hearing voices that weren't there, hearing their old ship's bell ringing somewhere in the distance, hearing their name called across open water that had nothing alive on it for 100 miles. The second was the heat. There was no shade in an open boat, and the doldrums sit close enough to the equator that the sun, overhead, at midday, was almost directly above, with no angle to soften it. Skin blistered within hours, then peeled, then blistered again on raw tissue underneath. Men's lips cracked and split. Their tongues swelled. Simply shifting position to relieve one burn meant exposing a different patch of skin to the same merciless light. There was no relief, no nightfall cool enough to matter, no escape from your own body becoming the source of constant pain. The third, and the one that actually broke men, was the loop. Every single ripple on that glassy water became a hope. Is that a current? Is that wind returning? Is that a sail on the horizon, coming to find me? And every single time, it was nothing. Days of that cycle. Hope rising and collapsing. Rising and collapsing ground down a man's grip on reality far faster than any physical wound could. Survivors who were eventually rescued from similar fates in later centuries described talking out loud to the sharks that inevitably began circling a drifting boat since blood, vomit, and waste in the water around, a stationary vessel always drew them eventually. Some described seeing their old ship clearly on the horizon, sailing back for them, moments before realizing nothing was actually there. In keel hauling, a man died in a single horrific minute of pain. In marooning, a man at least had solid ground and the dignity of choosing his own ending on his own timeline. Set adrift in the doldrums, a man's mind began dying long before his body did, and everyone on the crew who watched him rode away into that flat, silent water understood that what they were really sentencing him to wasn't drowning or starvation. It was watching himself slowly stop being able to trust his own thoughts. Here's what makes this sentence different from every other punishment on a pirate ship. The cat o' nine tails punished the body. Keel hauling punished the body in the most extreme way a ship's crew had available. Marooning punished isolation, while still leaving a man something to fight, a pistol, a choice, solid ground to stand on while he made it. Being set adrift in the doldrums attacked the one thing that every pirate, no matter how violent or hardened, actually depended on to survive: other people. Pirate crews weren't loose collections of strangers. They were tight, interdependent units that lived in close quarters, split profits according to a written contract, voted on major decisions together, and depended on each other completely in combat. A pirate without a crew wasn't just alone. He was, in every practical sense that mattered to him, already erased. No grave anyone would visit, no shipmates to remember his name in a story told over rum, no final, glorious fight where he went down swinging a cutlass and earned a place in legend. Just a slow disappearance into open water that would close back over the spot where he'd been, like he'd never existed at all. This is why captains reserved it for the worst betrayals a pirate could commit: killing a crewmate without cause, mutiny that failed, cowardice that got other men killed. These weren't crimes against property. They were crimes against the trust that held the entire crew together. And the punishment had to match that. A quick death would have been mercy. What these captains wanted, instead, was for every other man on the ship to watch that boat shrink through the distance, and understand, in his gut, exactly what total isolation would cost him if he ever broke that same trust. So the next time a pirate movie shows you a black flag, a skull and crossbones, a captain shouting orders over cannon fire, remember that none of that was actually the most feared thing on the water. In the 1700s, the thing that broke even the hardest men wasn't loud or violent at all. It was silence, it was stillness, it was an empty horizon with absolutely nothing on it, and the slow realization that nothing was ever going to change. Of everything we covered today, the lash, the keel, the island, and the open boat in the doldrums, which one do you think you'd fear most? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I'll be replying to the best theories down there. If this kind of unfiltered, real history is what you came here for, subscribe so the next one finds you. Thanks for watching, and stay salty.